and start again. So I don't know what I'm going to do with it as far as like, do I publish something? Like I could use the publisher I used for my book. Do I publish something and that he wasn't satisfied with? So I don't know. So what I ended up doing was going through the different manuscripts and the starts and the stops, several different things he wrote, and just like cutting and pasting pieces of it. And I thought, well, I'll put a couple pages of excerpts together of things he said. Well, when I got done doing this, I had like 15 pages, and it was sort of scrambled. So I put it kind of different subjects and condensed it down some. So anyway, that's what this is. If you didn't pick one up, you might want to take one with you. It's excerpts from the book that he's been working on, and it had every day it had a different title. It was like, how about if I call it such as a, you know, that sounds good to me, but you'll probably change your mind tomorrow. No, this is it for sure. You know, and then the next day he'd be like, you were right. I don't like that title either. How about this? But I found this particular title, Future Truth, on quite a few different manuscripts. So I thought, well, for lack of a better way to go, I'm going to use that one. But he talked a lot about the age of survival and the age of understanding. And he said that up until this point in human history, we have just been trying to get by, just trying to feed the kids and grow enough food and survive. But he said with the coming of the new age, with the AI and that sort of thing, we're going to enter, it reminded me when he talked about it of the age of Aquarius. And I guess it probably was in a way because he always considers himself and was proud to be a hippie. But he called it the age of understanding, that we were going to come to this new awareness in this new time. So that's the subtitle of it that he had, the age of survival to the age of understanding. And then for some reason he really liked this quote, so he had it on most of the manuscripts from Walt Kelly from Pogo. Half the time he attributed it to Charles Schultz, and I looked it up, and it's not. It's Walt Kelly. We have met the enemy, and he is us. So I put that on there too. I'm just going to read you a little bit of it. Future Truth. Your world is ablaze with torrid, accelerating technology. Folks are as oblivious as a startled fawn hearing her first hunter's gun click, or a dozing captain awakened by an ear-gouging thunderclap, or a baby scream at being alive. And then I called this next section roller coaster ride. We are on the upgrade of the first steep climb of a roller coaster. The iron links beneath our cars rumble and grumble with metallic pain. Our historic ascent is surrounded with fear and doubt as we are about to be catapulted down a breathtaking descent at speeds beyond unnerving. Our impeding exponential journey will be resplendent with sharp twists and turns. Though our screams may echo into the skies, we are committed to take this ride. The carnival of capitalism is an addictive American ritual. We see a chosen few leaving with big white teddy bears and hope that will be us. Year after year, we plop our money down into the coffers of disappointment. We are beguiled by the bright lights, the different media, the smells, the sounds of joy and scripted social belonging. Meanwhile, the system of rigged games and placated senses subsumes our money and our dreams. However, the descent of this exponential roller coaster has the very real potential to blow right off its tracks into a new reality. It may not be constrained by physical boundaries. We have every right to expect our ride to be in 5G, 4D, augmented reality, virtual reality, on blockchains, not tracks, with robotic engineers and intelligent digital assistants as conductors and ticket takers. That metaphor may be a tawdry device to grab your attention. Hope I got it. And then I called the next section, what the hell is exponentialism? Any of you who talked to him on the phone for any length of time heard him talking about you start with one or two of something, and when you go exponential, you get a bunch. Exponentialism is the ever-turning key which will unlock your future. It will continue to unleash new technology, redefine all pre-internet institutions, including economics, as well as guide your well-being and that of your family. Once told, the inventor of chess showed his new game to the Emperor of China. So intrigued was the Emperor that he offered a reward for being taught this chess. The inventor suggested a grain of rice for square one, 2 grains for square two, 4 grains for square three, and so on, doubling on each square. The emperor readily agreed. After 63 squares, the chess master owned 18 million trillion grains of rice, enough to cover the world twice over. Perhaps the emperor had him beheaded. Regardless, by embracing exponentialism, we will come out way ahead. When trying to guesstimate the future, each of us is like a snowball in an avalanche. We sense movement. All we see is blank white. We hear little as we are dragged along by our everyday existence. If history were a living entity, it could not explain to itself what is happening today. History cannot record, interpret, or convey the speed and magnitude of techno-change which we are currently enduring. Tomorrow will be infinitely more techno-complex. History will rupture like a cheap balloon inhaling the air from a hurricane. Speed, speed, speed. Where are the bottlenecks? Where is the power to process this much information coming from? How is it transferred around the globe? Who is using it? What cultural changes are required? How will it affect me? The primary catalyst of speed, 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 exponentialism, is the computer itself. Many of you are familiar with Moore's Law. The speed and power of the computer chip will double every 1.5 to 2 years. This exponentialism began in 1970 and now escalates beyond our ability to cope constructively. Basic exponentialism starts slowly, from 1 doubling to 2, 2 doubling to 4, 4 doubling to 8, etc. This doubling is astronomical today and will redefine our exponential future. Only now, this speed, speed, speed of exponentialism is in the knee of the exponential curve. We are no longer doubling our ability to process information in single digits, but we are doubling by strings of zeros per second. Charles Dickens' best and worst of times is screaming loudly. We are like deaf indentured servants vacationing along a vast ocean of life. We see the voluminous waters violently withdrawing, a Ten Commandments Moses episode. Gleefully, folks rush to pick up the free flopping fish. Others scramble for trinkets and shells, giving added meaning to Black Friday. The never-ending consumer adrenaline addiction, per normal, as planned, mutes awareness. Warning sirens are blaring. The roar in the distance builds. As the waters recede further, thundering tilts the skies. Focused on themselves, they remain oblivious to the obvious. What the hell is exponentialism? It is that tidal wave above, washing over every event in recorded history. It endangers power, money, and the social order with the reachable promise of unlimited freedom, fulfillment, adventure, involvement, belonging, and wonder, while threatening to provide for every man's everyday needs and concerns. Nothing less than a boiling blood transfusion of collective consciousness can awaken us from our synaptic. I can't read this sentence. Nothing less than a boiling blood transfusion of collective consciousness can awaken us from our synaptic slumber. Enlightened, excited, global understanding of myriad techno-challenges is mandatory. The American frozen collective intellect is like a continuum of turtles burrowing in the sand, waiting for the media-armed bulldozers of persuasion to politely pass over them. A turtle hiding in its shell cannot escape an endless fleet of bulldozers. The vaunted system, like all systems, is a function of its environment. Exponentialism is an irresistible force which will radically change any and all environments. We diminish it at inestimable peril with sad ignorance. While these years of exponentialism maturity have moved us inexorably toward a denouement of situational awareness, the encrusted people have not been sufficiently aroused to peer out from their self-imposed shells of meism to seek change. To envision technology's unrelenting exponential march, an analogy of a simple paycheck to computing capabilities may suffice. If you were making a $10,000 a year salary in 1984, in June of 2013, you received a raise. And I don't know how to read this number, but it's 232,000,000,000,000,000,000 a year. Is that? It's got to be more than
232 billion.
Billion?
Mm-hmm.
Really? Okay. In the 2013-2014 timeline, humanity's inundation by exponential technologies began in earnest. It was only vaguely heeded. Turtle soup, anyone? And then I'm going to read the very last section, because it was one of his kind of favorite sayings. Big perspective. My awesome friend Larry forthrightly told me, everyone wants a happy ending. I think he was probably saying, you gotta put a happy ending on this book. You may be able to script your own ending. My best offerings are these. Find today's and tomorrow's opportunities. Chart your families and your own direction. Adapt and flourish in tomorrow's knowledge environment. Achieve immortality. Make your own weather. Wrap yourself in wealth. Help all people. Obtain beyond genius intelligence. Realize spiritual gratification. Enjoy sexual fulfillment. Achieve enlightenment. From world consciousness bonding to merging with light to living your own created reality. Or just accomplish the hardest and best goal of all. Be happy. A half century ago, Marshall McLuhan said, we're driving into the future using the rear view mirror. Step on the time accelerator. To what would the speeds of today be analogous? We can only adapt to that about which we have knowledge. Our first step is to gain perspective. We must learn to see our opportunities or they will not emerge. We are on a carousel, trying to grab the brass ring. The challenge is that the carousel may be as fast as a super collider in Geneva, Switzerland. Compared to exponentialism, it took 10,000 years to create the shoelaces for our future wardrobe of life. Over 100 exponentially evolving technologies are exceeding seismic events every minute to change and improve our lives. We can be sure of these facts. Emerging technology is beyond vast. Exponentialism is blinding fast. Conflict with and between current cultures will be abrupt. Languages used by technology are so many and so arcane. Technology movements defy predictability. The rupturing of history is totally unprecedented. The coalescing of technologies will personify disbelief. Entire new paradigms will consistently provide unique opportunities such as telepathy, transhumanism, and hydrogen. What does that mean? I don't know. Anybody know why he put hydrogen in with transhumanism and telepathy? The knowledge environment is not realized, understood, or appreciated for its universal implications of potential joy. Where there is total change, there is total opportunity. Be prepared, build your knowledge, develop insights, make plans, be ready to act. If you do these things, you cannot be outflanked. Adapt, create, learn, communicate, collaborate, organize. And then the next is called Glass Half Full Runneth Over. And he quotes Paul Simon, all come to look for America. And Bob Dylan, there's too much confusion, said the joker to the thief. America has become an impressionistic painting hanging crookedly on the wall. The discussion of its content has a dissonant cadence of voices dallying in the din of dissatisfaction. America is a primitive society comprised of sociological pockets of disparate realities of Puritanism, fierce revolutionary independence, a hallowed heritage, unresolved Civil War angst, the Protestant ethic, decades as world savior and leader, all of which color our cultural fabric with puerile hubris. This is only a remnant to be considered in America's outward wardrobe, which we wear every day in our ill-fitted, tattered quality of life clothing. Making our apparel selections in the future will become infinitely more complex and contentious as fashions change and choices accelerate exponentially. Then he quotes, he said this was from Yes, but I looked it up on the internet and they're contributing it to Rush. And the men who hold high places must be the ones to start to mold a new reality closer to the heart. I don't know if any of you know what it's from. Do you know
Rush.
which it is? It's Rush?
Oh.
I don't know why it's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The greatest asset that we have is sustaining shelter. America the beautiful itself, from sea to shining sea. The question arises, where is our entitled deed? our sense of brotherhood and belonging, our shared ownership. We are failing miserably at any attempt to adjust our picture. Let's hang another picture beside bountiful beauty. Materially, we have or can produce anything. Our predecessors were adventurers on 3 little boats, the pioneers without McDonald's or 7-Eleven, free and brave heroes from our wars, and the dedicated, proud, honest American men and women. They would be deservingly disgusted with our inability to appreciate what we have, as well as our failure as self-aware animals to organize and enjoy basic well-being for all. We will need a huge frame for our third picture, Glass Runneth Over. The coming exponential change of our entire human spectrum requires us not only to think outside the box, but to crush the box. So I'm gonna get some t-shirts made, I think, that say crush the box. That was his thing. It's not just a matter of being outside the box. It's acting and living your life as if the box doesn't even exist. Well, you guys know. Anyway, I'm gonna let a couple other people talk about him, and I might read a poem or two that I wrote for him a little bit later. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is the yearbook from the first graduating class in Woodlawn High School in Baltimore, Maryland. Ron was a member of the first graduating class, and so was I. It was a brand new school. There were no traditions. If I remember correctly, I think when it opened, there wasn't even a 10th grade. Ron's picture and my picture appeared here. We were members of the soccer team. So when I arrived at Woodlawn, there were terrific teachers and a great principal, but a lot of unhappy students because we all planned to go to a different high school. And lo and behold, this new high school opened, and you know, it was a problem. And in fact, it was so bad that one of the really popular schools was Milford Mill, which is still in existence. And Milford Mill's colors were green and white, and some students were so upset they wore green and white to school every day. So things needed to be organized, and I had some leadership experience in Scouts and a few other organizations, and a couple of people approached me and said, hey, why don't you run for student government president? I said, I don't know whether I want to do that, new school and all that, got my arm twisted. Lo and behold, I was elected student council president, so amazingly. So I guess the first thing I would want to say is Ron's passing is a big loss for all the students at Woodlawn, everybody, regardless of year. But I didn't know Ron through student government, and we weren't in any classes at all whatsoever. But I had played some soccer earlier, and so there were no football teams in Baltimore County at that time either. So there wasn't a whole heck of a lot for men's sports. Women had field hockey and a few other things. So I went out for soccer and showed up in the field one day, and I don't know, 15, 20, 25 people showed up. So we all went through these tryouts, and we had a very good coach who had actually played in Germany for a couple of years. He was very skilled. So after all was said and done, I think he said to me, hey Bob, you're really not the best offensive player on the team, and you're really not the best defensive player on the team, but you're pretty good at both of them. You're kind of like the Swiss Army knife. So you're going to be our center halfback. Sometimes you're going to be an offense, sometimes you're going to be defense, and you kind of need to keep things moving with the team. And of course, all the other students, come on in. I'm not saying anything important anyway. And of course, all the other students tried out too. And I didn't know Ron at the time, but looking at retrospectively, apparently the coach identified Ron as a good offensive player. And if you know anything about soccer, usually the offensive players are really fast. If you watch soccer on TV, they usually can run rings around everybody. Ron couldn't do that. He wasn't the fastest player. or sometimes they're really tricky, like if you see a video of the late Pele and you see all these really sophisticated moves, especially from the Brazilian players. Ron couldn't do that either. In fact, Ron was very big as soccer players go, and he was very, very strong. So I think the coach selected him because he was unorthodox. So we had the speedy guys and the tricky guys, but Ron wasn't those guys. And so we'd have practice games, but during practice, sometimes we'd have one-on-one. And so sometimes I drew Ron in practice one-on-one. That was good for me because he played differently than anybody else. He didn't try to trick you. He didn't try to run around you. He just sort of bowled you over without fouling you. If he'd been playing football, he would have been a fullback. And I'd like to think I helped him be a pretty good player too, because I supposedly wasn't too shabby defensively, and maybe in retrospect he improved as well. So we got to know each other through soccer, but there was no time to talk on the field. Well, his last name obviously began with H-O, and mine doesn't start with H-O, it's H-U. But our lockers were next to each other. And so after practice, after climbing out of the shower, I remember we would have these discussions. I can't remember anything that we talked about. But I remember we had some real discussions. They weren't heated discussions. They were just robust discussions. And what's funny about that is our 60th reunion, I can hardly believe it, is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. And Ron and I had not seen each other for years until the 50th reunion. And then we kicked around emails several weeks ago, and I guess he planned on coming. So I got this email from Ron that said, "Hey, good to hear from you. I remember the many quasi-important discussions we had." And I thought, you know, if it had been anybody else, it would have been those unimportant discussions. It would have been the semi-important, not Ron, it had to be quasi-important. So Ron was a wordsmith, and you can tell he was definitely a wordsmith. So now it's 60 years later, and as I look back, what I think I learned from Ron was to appreciate the differences in people, because Ron was different. He was different then, and he was different his whole life, and that helped me a lot. I wound up actually going into what's now called human resource management, otherwise known as personnel management, kind of by accident. And I think part of that had to do with just learning to appreciate the benefits that different people offer. So I kind of learned that quite a bit. I think I wound up becoming an economist and doing some things like that. And if you listen to a lot of what Ron wrote, he wasn't wrong. He was just early.
Yeah.
Okay. I told one of his friends, I used to like to watch the Johnny Carson show many years ago. And on New Year's Eve, they had a little feature where a guy would come out in a tux. And he had silver white hair. And the guy's name was Criswell Predicts. And Johnny Carson would come out with a tux, and so it was a funny comedy bit. And Criswell would come out with these 3x5 cards, and he'd read a prediction, and it would be absolutely outlandish. You know, I'd watch it, and I said, you know, never going to happen. And then Johnny Carson would play off a comedy line, and I really enjoyed that bit. And I don't remember a lot of them, but I remember one time the prediction was global temperatures are going to increase by about 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade. The ice caps are going to begin to melt. The oceans are going to rise, and we're going to have terrible weather. And I think that prediction was about 30 years ago. Well, guess what? So Ron was an early version of Criswell. As I said, I wound up being an economist, and Ron wrote a lot about American society, and he didn't say this, but gross national product. He actually would have been happier had he lived in Scandinavia, because his value system was more consistent with what you see in Norway and Sweden and Denmark, because they're small countries, and yeah, the US has the largest economy in the world, but in Scandinavia, they don't worry much about gross national product. What they worry about is gross national wellness. Now, I love this country, I want to be clear about that. We have a high infant mortality rate, skewed wealth distribution, pollution. Ron wasn't wrong. Okay, it's just we ain't there yet in terms of where we need to go. The way Ron plays soccer is he would just do things that you didn't expect. He wouldn't run around anybody. He wouldn't trick anybody. Sometimes when I'd be at midfield and our team was on attack, I'd see two defensive players, possible to get through, and Ron would turn sideways and go like this and go right between them. His blonde, curly hair blowing in the wind. I had vivid memories of that. And he was good. I mentioned Milford Mill, and there's a reason I mentioned that. We had sort of a so-so team. You know, we were a mixture of people, hadn't played together, and in those days in Baltimore County, exchange students were permitted to play.
Right.
So we played against some teams where it had somebody from Italy, somebody from whatever. Our big rival was Milford Mill, and Milford Mill had two exchange students from Germany on their team. So when you played Milford Mill, it was like playing a pro team. Well, early in the year, we lost a couple games 1-0, or as they say in soccer, 1-0,
Yeah.
right, to be correct. But we were competitive. But the big deal was playing Milford Mill. We won 4-1. And that was a very important game. It kind of put us on the map, and Ron was very instrumental in that game. I think to understand Ron, if you have time, go on your computer or phone sometime and look up Steve Jobs' commencement address at Stanford University in 2005. Steve Jobs never graduated from college. He starts his remarks by saying that. But Jobs gets up there and says, I'm paraphrasing obviously, I never graduated from college, he says, but I have 3 stories to tell you. That's it. And the first story he talks about is connecting the dots. And basically what he says is, you can never connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backward. And as I think about Ron, looking backward, he was an original thinker, ahead of his time, and basically a linguist and a real wordsmith. You could see that in his vocabulary. So when I read his obituary, I was sort of semi-surprised about, I was an English teacher at Baltimore City College, and Baltimore City College is a very prestigious school. In case you don't know, it's the #1 liberal arts high school in Baltimore. And he was teaching honors English, so tells me maybe our locker room discussions weren't a waste. He was good. The second thing that Steve Jobs talks about is love and loss, but not in a romantic sense. What he talks about is, if you have something you like to do, and then it's taken away from you, you want to recapture what it is that you lost. And I think Ron left teaching because he needed to get back to what he'd lost. And that was sort of the freedom and do what you want and that kind of thing. And in the 60s, there wasn't room for nonconformists. We were coming out of the Eisenhower years. So, you had to be a conformist. I struggled with that myself. I wanted to be a physicist, but I got very concerned about some of the things that Ron was concerned about, society stuff, and I had a little mini crisis academically about what I want to do. And anyway, I wound up going into economics. So Ron was not alone. A lot of us kind of wrestled with some of these big ideas. The other thing that Steve Jobs talks about is death. And he says there's no escaping it. You know, every day if you get up and you look in the mirror and you say to yourself, is this were my last day? What would I want to be doing what I'm doing today? And if the answer is no, too many days in a row, you need to make a change. And I think that Ron looked in the mirror a number of days and asked himself that question and decided he wanted to make a change. Finally, Jobs concludes by saying, your time is limited. Don't waste it living somebody else's life. And Ron didn't. He lived his life the way he wanted and made a difference. And I think that if he had been in a different society, he might have been nominated for a prize in behavioral economics. I've read some of his stuff. I've got a graduate degree in finance and economics. Ron knew what he was talking about. He's just early. His writings on Social Security and that kind of stuff, they're not wrong. It's just a couple of generations early. But he was a unique guy, lived his life the way he wanted to. Those of you that knew him were lucky to know him. Thanks.
Brother with some stories about it being Ron. How I first met Ron, like everybody, you've heard from him playing soccer. Towson State was a teacher's college, and that was it. To try to get any decent athlete there, they weren't going to do it unless he was going to become a teacher. But Ron went beyond that. Ron knew that the coach at Towson State, he played for the United States Olympic team. So he felt, this guy's that good that he can represent the United States in the Olympics. I'm going to go there to play. Even though a lot of us went to bigger name colleges, he went there. And I'm just giving this comparison to let you see the big difference. This school wasn't even considered a soccer school. So the big thing was they wind up winning a national championship. What was big news. Ron was in the papers and all that because Ron was the guy that scored the goal when Towson State won that national championship. And if you've never played sports at all, you really don't know how much a national title really means to even a person or the school. It's really something there. So, a couple years from them, I'm a little younger than what Ron is. He's playing and I'm playing Maryland Major Soccer League. And at that time, it was like a professional league. You had a lot of ex-professional players in it, and you had all the top college players playing in it. He's playing with Cy Blooms, and I was playing with Dnipro. And we're going to meet in the season. I heard this story about this Ron Holmes, the All-American this, Ron Holmes, the All-American that. So when we go out there, his first play, I've watched Ron, he didn't know it. I told Marilyn about it. So I went out and I watched. And I told his brother about it. I said, and I told Bob about it. Ron had this move where he stepped over the ball with his right, stepped over with the left, and then he would be like a ballet dancer. He'd get up on one foot, pivot 180, and then take off on you. Like you said, he cut between guys and all. So by watching him play and all that, I got to see that movie. I said, I know he ain't gonna do nothing when he comes playing against us. I said, just, I'll let him make that right over the ball, I'll let him make that left. And then when he goes into his pivot, 180 degree, that's when I'm gonna plow into him and get the ball and put him down on the ground. So, since I knew what he was gonna do, I was just waiting. He didn't know I knew what he was going to do. That's why I went to games to see what he was doing. So when he did that, I put him on the ground. I said, how can you be considered an All-American? I said, you ain't got no boo. If you know what's good for you, you better just stay down on the ground, curly hair, and not get up no water. So, to make a long story short, the following year, they won Ron's team won the championship that year. They were called Cy Blooms. And somehow the team was sold. And the guy that bought the team, he got rid of all the players that were originally Cy Blooms because he bought the team. He was going to bring his own players in. So I'm playing with another team, the Nebro, and I'm getting frustrated because I'm center halfback and I got guys put the ball right on their foot. They kick it a mile over the goalpost, put the ball on their foot, wide this way, wide that way. Well, another thing I noticed from studying, Ron had a knack, like Bob told you earlier, he could put the ball in the net. He wasn't going to tear you up with your speed, but when it come to shooting and putting that ball in the net, he'd do it. So I told my coach, if you want me to come back and play for you next year, you better make sure you get Ron Holmes, because I'm tired of busting my butt because I was the center halfback doing it, and these guys can't even put the ball 1 foot away from the goal, top. So we signed Ron, and then that's how our friendship started there. Then it went to a personal level where myself, my wife, and Ron and his wife, Kim, we would go out to dinner. We associated, did a lot together. And I felt so proud also because Kim and Ron thought so much about me and my wife and my family, because he was really a family-oriented guy, that he would let us and trust us with babysitting Brett. That was a big deal to me, that they trust us that much, that they let their child be babysitted with us. They trust us with them. Then the story I told his brother earlier, like I said, we socialized. One day I come in to pick them up. We're going to go out for dinner. And there's a picture laying here. I go over, I look at the picture. I says, that's Jack Ham. Ron says, you know Jack Ham? I says, yeah, I know Jack Ham. He's a star player for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He says, well, that was Kim's boyfriend. I said, Kim, what's she doing with you then? He says, what do you mean what's she doing with me? She's decided she don't want Braun, she wants Brainy guy, plus she wants to get rescued out of this little town of Pittsburgh. So she married me, that's how I got her. So I thought that was funny, and I would like to constantly needle him. Man, she could have Jack Ham and she winds up with you. I said, that's like winding up with a hamburger when you could have had a steak. So at the time I told his brother that he was selling life insurance. He didn't have one of these big corporate jobs. So of course he taught me, because that's what they do. They use their friends, teammate, different stuff to sell life insurance. So as time goes on, all of a sudden, Ron disappears. We lost contact and all that stuff. And I didn't know, I heard that he had a nervous breakdown. Then out of the blue, probably 3 or 4 years later, I get a phone call. Hey, Jerry. I said, yeah. You know who this is? I said, yeah, Ron. I said, where the hell you been at these past couple years? He said, well, once we get our friendship back together again, I'm going to tell you some stuff, you know, so you can know what happened. So then that's how our friendship started up again. So then as it goes on, Ron hits another rough spot. You know, he lost his family and everything. And then I get a call, and now he's with Marilyn. He says, hey, Jerry. Yeah, Ron, what do you need now? I don't need nothing. I says, well, what do you want? He says, I enjoy our talking and stuff. He says, I want to let you know I'm living in Pennsylvania, and I'm dating a woman from up there, which Maryland is, and I want us to get together, you know, like at the old days, the way it used to be. I said, okay, so we did that. Marilyn, she got to meet my wife before my wife passed. She got introduced to my girls and of course to me, so we would get together at least once a year, you know, to go to a restaurant and all. And then another amazing thing was I told Meryl, she got a real big kick out of it. One day I get a call and it's Ron. I says, what's wrong? I got emergency. I said, what's the emergency? He says, just come up to my house and I'll let you know. So I come up to the house and all. I said, what's wrong, Ron? Kim, okay? What's going on? He said, I got a flat tire. I said, what do you mean you got a flat tire? Change the thing. He says, I don't know how to change a tire. I said, wait a minute. Everybody considers you to be a genius. You're telling me you're a genius and you can't change a tire? Yeah, that's what I'm telling you. You're going to change the tire for me, or aren't you? I said, yeah, I'll change the tire. I said, just answer me one thing, Ron. He says, I said, how can you even change the tire? You can't even change a tire. He says, you consider me a genius, don't you? I said, yeah. He says, well, genius don't do this kind of stuff. That's manual labor, mechanical stuff. He says, you run machines and all. You're mechanical. I'm not mechanical. I'm a brain. I said, all right. That explains it then. And put it in to my story and my relationship with Ron. Ron, he was like a dear brother to me and all. We were really friends. I don't know, there was just, Marilyn probably knows more about it than what I do. There was just something that Ron really somehow took a liking to me. He says he liked how I looked out for my wife and kids over my things, because there were some things, I'm not going into detail, where I loved stuff, but my family came first. I wouldn't worry about individual things, you know. My family was the number one thing in my life, and that meant everything. I think that's the special thing he had in his heart, that, man, I really like this Jerry. That Jerry puts his family above everything, that he ain't worried about. He could do this, he could do his family, but it affected his family in any way. He wasn't going to have it affect his family. Thank you very much. And we have such a great loss with Ron. I mean it. Ron, there's only one Ron Holmes. There'll never be another Ron Holmes as long as we live. Thank yous all.
Amen to that. And one thing probably nobody knows, he wore a size 7 triple E shoe.
Huh.
I know.
Oh yeah, but I mean, it's small, but it's wide. So, growing up, we were competitive, you know, even though I was 7 years younger. But Ron didn't like to take advantage of, you know, just win. He wanted to make things competitive. So we played football in the backyard, and it was a small yard. You had to run the ball from one side to the other, and he would hop on one leg. That was the advantage, you know. I had to try to tell he'd be one leg like this. So it was kind of hard actually to even get him around one leg to bring him down because he was so big. I was probably 100 pounds, and you know he was 200 pounds or 180. Well, back then he's probably 160, but he was strong as an ox, like
Yeah.
said. And we played a lot of cards, so everything was competitive. Rent house and Scrabble, and soccer. We actually would hitchhike sometimes to Catonsville because they had lights that you could play at night. You'd have to put a quarter in the light pole to turn the lights on. And it lasted about half an hour, and the lights would be in the middle of playing. Somebody got a quarter? So he actually invented a game. This was for his advantage to learn. He called it soccer tennis. Now, you know, I'm this little kid, and I'm on one side, so I get the ball, and we played like the game of tennis, and I had to throw it on the other side, but he had to kick it. So I threw it, and he kicked it, so it helped his skills a little bit. Did he ever tell you about soccer tennis? He invented that game. Then he was at City College. You know, I think he only taught for a year. He didn't like it, and he said, you know, he grew his hair long, and he said, so, you know, I'm going to California. And he actually had some credit cards. He ran them up and bought me some gifts. He bought me my first stereo. It was a Montgomery Ward's Airline stereo, and you know, and I got some Beatle albums, and I listened to Abbey Road all day and that kind of stuff. So he went off to California, came back, and his hair was I mean, his hair was out to here. Yeah, and his beard was out to here. And he was a nonconformist who spoke about being conformed, but he was a nonconformist. I remember, I think I told the story where the police officer, we're walking up with a basketball up to Lansdowne to play some ball. Police officer spins around and gets out of the car. He says, "What's your name?" And my brother goes, "What's your name?" He says, "Where do you live?" And he goes, "Where do you live?" So the policeman got flustered and just left. But then he had Cam. He met Cam, had Brett, and you know, things went pretty good. And then, you know, there were some issues, and I didn't really get to see him for the last 9 years. We had a falling out, so I kind of regret that part of it. And I just want to thank Marilyn for taking care of him. And I'm glad he was happy, because he was, last time I saw him, he was not happy. It's not a happy individual. And his favorite word is exponential. That is his favorite word, by the way. So thank you, Marilyn.
Yes.
Which is dedicated partly to Ron. So you want to get that, and then I pulled out of the book, and maybe I think there's 2 other poems that aren't in the book, because I wrote them too recently, that are in this little booklet of pieces that I wrote for him, called Warrior's Heart. I'm going to read a couple of pieces and end with the title of the book poem. But the reason I called the book The Great Silk Void is because there's a poem for him in this book which is called that. And people ask me what it means. I guess it just means kind of like the unknown universe or something like that. But the poem itself is about the way that Ron was not limited. We all are, it seems to me, but he wasn't. So it's called The Great Silk Void. We are not like you. For us, freedom is fluid. It comes and goes, like a whimsical pauper selling orchids in the park on Easter Sunday. For us, freedom is the pewter shoe in some medieval Monopoly game, always in play and always landing on someone else's boardwalk. And just when we think we are free, some new pattern threatens to confine us, like a menacing mutineer steeped in blood. Not so for you. You are a nimble outlaw, dodging the rules with superb finesse. Most of us never catch the tail of freedom. Like a comet, it makes a slow orbit around our desires and hovers out of reach, just beyond our pallid smiles. For us, freedom is precious and rare, like a pearl in a capricious oyster or a lavender locket in the British Museum. But you are fearless. You open your silver umbrella and recite your plausible password, and suddenly the guards stand aside, all the metallic mushrooms melt, the ancient snares unfurl, the cosmic coins rain down, and you are on a metaphysical shopping spree amidst all our motley mutineers. You are liberated and free, a wonderment of oblique renewal. The rest of us can only admire your occult voyage as you sail like a renegade in a parfait glass, skirting the rim of the great silk void. So that's how the book became named after that poem for him. I'm going to read the poem that he liked best that I wrote for him, but I probably have to explain it a little bit. He always told me, and a couple of you have said thank you, that I rescued him because I saw just a brilliant spirit, and just so lost and in financial trouble. But the financial trouble, I don't think people can find a way around that. It was the emotional trouble, the pain.
Right.
And some of you know, and maybe some of you don't, but he couldn't sleep at night. He had like this fear of going to sleep, because whenever he went to sleep, he started screaming and kicking. I mean, I slept in a totally different room in the other end of the house, because he yelled and kicked and screamed and cried. And they tried quite a few different kinds of tranquilizers and things like that to make it go away, and it just never really was successful. There was something going on, some type of pain. I know he had a couple of head injuries. I sometimes even wondered if he had some type of, like, there was a mark like right here, like a scar. If you saw me, you probably saw the lump right there. I don't know if that was part of the problem, that something got messed up in his brain, and like sort of almost like somebody would have seizures. But anyway, he had all kinds of difficulties like that. But I saw some of his writing, and I could see this amazing spirit. So anyway, he says I rescued him. And this poem is called Blood Bargain. And the reason I said it needs some explaining, I used to be a Latin teacher. And so a lot of my poetry, you'll notice if you get my book, has like Greek and Roman mythology in it and stuff like this. And there was a guy named Orpheus whose girlfriend or lover, Eurydice, died and went to Hades. Now Hades isn't exactly like what we think of as hell, but anyway, you travel down the river Styx, usually in a boat, and then you end up in Hades. And Orpheus didn't want her to die, and he went after her, and he made a deal with Hades to bring her back to life. And Hades said, you can do that, but when you get her out of here, don't look back at her. Well, if you've ever heard the story of Lot's wife in the Bible, it's sort of similar to that. He looked back, and she went back. In that case, Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt. But anyway, so this has a bunch of references in it to the river Styx and Orpheus and all that. Blood Bargain. This is no charming ferry boat ride along the river Styx. But even so, like Orpheus, I am coming in after you, feeling my way along these dank walls, making the steep descent to find you, my feet slipping on these loose slate gray stones. This is Liberation Day for your resilient soul. I struck a bargain with Hades, and I am coming in after you. You are lost in a wasteland of caves, and you carry the churlish world on your shoulders. So I am coming in after you, raising my lantern in the dark, fending off furies and dodging the demons that haunt this convoluted path. I love you, and you are destined to carry the world on your wet shoulders, So I am coming through this labyrinth of torment and fear, clutching your lacerated hands and not letting go, snatching you from the screaming claws of the harpies. Loyalty triumphs the leering face of Hades. So I am coming in after you. You have much work to do, and I love you. So I paid a vast ransom to extricate you. I struck a blood bargain with Hades. I am dragging you back from vacancy, past the blistering coals of this maze, through these tall infernal gates, and toward the sweet lucidity of fate. And then this is the poem that I named the book for, and it's a strange kind of story. I hadn't known him very long. We were sitting and talking. This is before he even moved in with me back when he had an apartment in Glen Burnie. And I don't even remember what we were talking about. But all of a sudden he just started to cry. And he said, if I die, I don't want you to mourn for me. I'm a warrior, and warriors die. So that's what I based this poem on. It's called Warrior's Heart, which I named a little booklet for. In this crippled autumn dawn, your entreaty begins with the silent fervor of the Eucharist. You weep in my arms, and you say, promise you will never mourn for me. I am a warrior, warriors die. Warrior indeed. You know the liturgy. You understand the sacrifice. Yelping in alarm, you raise a solitary flag with gnarled hands. Your sheer audacity ignites the signal fires. Yours is a noble quest, to search in darkened crevices for consciousness, to catch the key in a golden box and bring it safely home, to raise the castle gate, to liberate the rabble, to release the powerless. You are a warrior, it is true. Besieged, you brave the breath of dragons with iconoclastic grace. You storm the fortress of deceit, the blaze of bare integrity, your only sword. You carry on a future quest, defying death in random lands. You are indeed a warrior in the ticking teeth of time. So I will never mourn for you, or tear my blouse, or curse the sky. You have a warrior's heart, my lord, and warriors never die. Thank God.
It isn't worth shaking. Right. When I told the people